Wow. I really like him, dude. I haven't looked at it in a while, and it's just really silly. Hi, I'm Jay. I want to talk about Jaws. So something you need to know about me is that for the first 10 years of my life, I just refused to watch movies ever because they all terrified me. Invariably. It did not matter what the movie was about. Really, it was that I was just scared of conflict, which movies do usually have. To this day, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is the scariest movie I have ever seen, and I actually cannot elaborate further on that because I will get upset. For some reason, the exception to my fear of movies when I was a kid was monster movies. I was almost always totally fine with those. I think largely because the conflict in most monster movies is not interpersonal. You're generally not super worried about the nuances of people's feelings because everyone is feeling the same thing, which is scared of Godzilla. And fear of Godzilla does take precedence in that situation. So I did watch a lot of monster movies as a kid, and my favorite one was Jaws. Is Jaws a monster movie? Functionally, yes, argue with the wall. If you don't know, which you do, but if you don't, Jaws is a movie about this fuck-off big shark that is terrorizing White Peopleville by eating everyone. It's Martha's Vineyard, but that's White Peopleville. And the plot follows three guys that are trying to track down the shark and kill it. There's one guy, two guy, three guy, they're all guy, you get the picture. Jaws was directed by Steven Spielberg as one of his first movies. He was 26 when he made it. Jaws hit theaters in 1975, and it did a lot of important stuff that we will talk about later in this video, but for now we're gonna keep talking about my favorite subject, which is me. I saw Jaws for the first time when I was, I think, 9 years old. And I remember the moment that they revealed a shark so clearly because at the time it was potentially the funniest thing I had ever seen. As you probably know though, when Jaws came out, nobody thought the shark was funny. Everybody thought it was terrifying. Famously, everyone was scared of this movie. And that fear is what we're going to talk about in this video because I find it really interesting that on a psychological level, it wasn't actually caused by the shark. But we do need to start with the shark. So here he is. He's just really good. I really like him. To be clear, the shark as a special effect looked pretty okay at the time, but the time was 1975. So you can imagine how it looked to me in 2012. I do think it's worth noting though that this was only 2 years after Jaws, and this was 7 years before Jaws. So yeah, the shark looked pretty okay for the time. It was still kind of janky. The reason it was kind of janky was because the conditions in which they filmed this movie were super janky. They filmed Jaws on location, which is to say on the open ocean, and they found out that filming on the open ocean sucks. The sky changes color from moment to moment, and every time the sky changes color, the water also changes color, so that's a big continuity issue. Keeping a camera steady when you're on a rocking boat is hard. It's the Atlantic Ocean in Massachusetts, so that water is pretty cold year-round. And boats can actually sink if you didn't know. And they did do that. They did sink. More than once. So filming on the ocean sucked. I feel like probably any person could have told them that, but whatever. The point is, since they were on the water, they couldn't fake the shark. It couldn't be like a miniature or stop motion or a composite film trick because it had to be in the water and it had to be splashing around and physically interacting with the actors. And they had to film it with only equipment that they could fit and reasonably operate on a boat. The shark had to be a practical effect. The result of all this was Bruce, the $500,000 robo shark. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $3 million. And there are actually 3 Bruces, so 3 robo sharks. Bruce is a collective noun. And Bruce is pretty cool. He's designed to swim, open and close his mouth, and thrash around, and he can do all those things in water, just not salt water. The test runs for Bruce happen in a swimming pool, and then they take him out to Martha's Vineyard and put him in the Atlantic Ocean and find out that salt water is corrosive, and Bruce's guts are made out of carbon steel. The machinery on which Bruce operates fucks up on day one. The first time they put him in the ocean, the head sinks and the tail floats, and he's just kind of super vertical in the water. He was attached to rigid supports, but it didn't matter. Apparently when swimming, the shark is capable of making right-hand turns sometimes and left-hand turns never. All this according to the director, Steven Spielberg, who later described Bruce as the first real prima donna actor he ever worked with. So very early on, the production crew gets to a point where they're making in-water repairs on this robot just about every day, often multiple times a day. Filming with Bruce proves to just not be a sustainable thing. And that's a problem because apparently the original script for Jaws has so much shark in it. Like, the first draft of the screenplay has him in frame all the time. Now, if you've seen the movie, you'll know that in the final cut, the actual shark is barely in it. He's on screen for a total of about 4 minutes, and you don't see him at all until an hour and 21 minutes into the movie. That's because, as we know, they can't use Bruce nearly as much as they intended to because Bruce sucks. But it's not like they can just remove the shark from the shark movie because that also sucks. So they need a solution, and they decide to pull that solution directly from the source material. A book? Yeah, Jaws was actually originally a book. It's by Peter Benchley. When Spielberg was reading the book, he noted that the only scenes that made him, like, actively feel fear were the scenes with the barrels. Let me set this up for you. Guy 1, 2, and 3 are on a boat hunting fuck-off big shark, as is the way, and they decide that the shark is too fuck-off big to just catch it with a rod and reel. So the plan is to chum the water, get the shark to come to the surface, and then shoot it with a harpoon that's tied to this empty yellow barrel. The idea is that the barrel floats, so the shark won't be able to pull it underwater for very long. So it'll tire itself out pulling, and then when it gives up, the barrel will float back to the surface, and we now know where the shark is, and it's probably too tired to run away again, so we can just go over there and kill it. That's the plan with the barrels. Of course, this shark is like 4 arms tier strong and actually can hold the barrel underwater. They do this again. They harpoon it 2 more times, and it's like...
Can stay down with 3 barrels on him. Not with 3 barrels he can.
That's what happens in the book, but it also ends up happening in the final screenplay because of their technical difficulties. Bruce sucks and they can barely use him, so the barrels take his place. Like, yeah, you can't see a shark this way, but you get it. The barrels are, at first, just a solution to a technical problem. But then the movie hits theaters, and everyone finds out that your brain is actually way, 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 way more scared of things that it can't see. The psychology of human fear has of course been studied from a lot of different angles, but in relation to Jaws, it can largely be boiled down to how your brain interprets suspense. The Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech if you're not weird, conducted a study in 2015 that investigated how people respond to suspense in film. The study monitored the brain activity of various test subjects while they watched suspenseful film clips that were surrounded by a blinking checkerboard pattern. And the study specifically defined suspense as moments in which a character faces a potential negative threat over the course of a few minutes, as opposed to like a few seconds. The subject's ability to pay attention to the clip versus the checkerboard around the clip was tracked and mapped by which centers of the brain were most involved in processing the information. And the study found that areas of the brain that are devoted to tracking periphery, so devoted to paying attention to the checkerboard pattern, became less active when the subjects were watching clips that were defined as suspenseful, as opposed to clips that weren't. Effectively, during those suspenseful moments, the subjects' brains made the subconscious decision to pay closer attention to what was going on in the film as opposed to their own surroundings. The theory proposed by the study is that because the brain becomes invested in like the stressed emotional state of a character over a long period of time as opposed to over just a couple seconds, and therefore has to spend more time devoting energy towards perceiving the character's fear, more energy becomes devoted to the viewer experiencing that fear themselves. To be able to feel the fear of people around you is thought to be an evolutionary pack response. Like, if one member of the group is in danger and exhibits a fear response, it's generally reasonable to assume that the rest of the group might also be in danger and therefore could be kept alive by sharing that fear response. All this to say, suspense is basically just a unique type of fear that creates a persistent sense of lurking danger. That ability to endure is what makes it so effective, because then the audience never gets a break. At the time that Jaws came out, suspense had, of course, been explored in movies before, but there are a couple other big factors that make Jaws get to people. First of all, it's set on the ocean, which is not a human habitat and nobody knows shit about it except that they can't survive there. Everyone needs to be scared of the ocean. I love the ocean. I love swimming in the ocean. I love fishing in the ocean. I'm terrified of the ocean. And because I'm scared of the ocean, I don't do stupid shit when I'm around it, which is healthy and smart. The ocean is also like unfamiliar on the screen. That had never been done before. Jaws was the first major motion picture to be filmed primarily at sea. The movie also goes pretty far out of its way to communicate that the shark is like vengeful on purpose. Robert Shaw gives that super iconic monologue in the middle of the movie where he's like, sharks attack people because they're morally bad.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, doesn't seem to be living.
That is such a good monologue. Like, absolutely insane overall performance. Also made a lot of people really hate sharks, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Plus, all shark moments in this movie are accompanied by the scariest music ever made. But like generally speaking, the unfamiliarity of it does contribute to why people are so scared. Like it's the 70s. People don't have nearly as much access to random information. The average viewer doesn't know much about sharks other than that they exist. And then this movie comes through and says, yes, they do exist, very close to you actually, and also they are enormous and violent and want to murder you specifically. Not great. And then one other key thing that made Jaws really scary is that when it released, it was rated PG. Apparently the reasoning there was that, well, the movie is violent, the violence in it isn't being done by humans, so it isn't quite violent enough to be rated R, and it couldn't be rated PG-13 because PG-13 didn't exist yet as a category. A lot of kids saw this movie. A lot of kids. All this to say that people see Jaws, or rather they don't, and everyone freaks the fuck out. The public is terrified, the movie is super successful, Steven Spielberg launches a career for which I am grateful because, like, this we know, right? The ultimate effects are also well documented. The success of Jaws had a pretty huge impact on the film industry. Like before Jaws came out, movies that were released in the summertime almost invariably performed like way worse than movies that were released the rest of the year. People didn't want to be indoors in a movie theater during the summer. And then Jaws comes out and everyone hears about how scary it is and goes and sees it to the point that it single-handedly invents the concept of the summer blockbuster movie. It also was the highest grossing film of all time for 2 years before it got, overtaken by this like little indie flick. Jaws also had an effect on sharks, which is actually a pretty heavily debated topic. A lot of people seem to think that Jaws like single-handedly caused the global decline in shark populations, which like numerically makes no sense. Jaws did cause some decline, especially on both coasts of the United States. After the movie came out, and especially like right after the movie came out, a lot of people did go out and just kill sharks for sport. Like not to eat, just to get them out of the water because they were scared. Which unironically is an insane move. How are you gonna go to a place where you cannot live and find something that can only live there and then be like scared and upset that it's there? Dog, when you're in the ocean, you're the one in the wrong. You're not supposed to be there. That's like going to an old folks home and then being mad that there are old people. What did you think was in there? Anyway, the like random sport killings that Jaws kind of kickstarted can only account for like a couple thousand shark deaths max, and unfortunately that number is less than a drop in the bucket. It's estimated that humans kill about 100 million sharks every year, and that's a pretty lowball estimate. By comparison, in 2024, the total number of people killed by sharks worldwide was 7. But yeah, most of that, at least 100 million sharks, die either as commercial fishing bycatch or as victims of finning. Bycatch are things that are like caught by accident in fishing nets, and it's a huge problem overall, but for sharks in particular because, as you may know,
sharks have to continue to move forward or they'll drown.
And being stuck in a net means they can't do that. So while sometimes other fish survive being bycatch and end up getting thrown back, sharks almost never do. And then finning is the practice of catching a shark, harvesting its fins for food, and dumping it back in the water to bleed out. So that's fun. But yeah, compared to those two things, the people hunting out of fear made almost no impact. This is a bit of a tangent, but it's worth noting that shark conservation is really, really difficult. Like, more difficult than most fish conservation. A big chunk of shark species are migratory, and a lot of those migrate far. So like you can write legislation to protect a given shark species in the waters of one country, but then the second the shark swims into the waters of another country, those rules no longer apply. And then that's all further complicated by international waters and the UN rules about that and blah blah blah. Back to the point of the video. I am like fully of the belief that Jaws would not have been nearly as successful as it was if they had actually been able to use Bruce the robo shark. I really think it just wouldn't have hit people the same way. The lack of shark was, on a technical level, a mistake, but in my opinion, it's also the reason the movie was a masterpiece. And yeah, Jaws did scare people, but for what it's worth, it also brought a lot of attention to sharks in general, which made a lot of people take an interest in them. Like if I hadn't seen Jaws as a kid, we wouldn't be doing this. But I did see Jaws, and now I've spent my whole life learning fish things to an arguably unhealthy extent. So that's where I'm at. Anyway, thanks for hanging out.